Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
Yep, makes sense to me. Neil deGrasse Tyson kicking off episode 24 of this podcast. There's a team of 3 tonight. We may have 5 a little bit later, but I'll tell you more about that shortly. Welcome. An atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. It's not the beginning of a joke. We do like a laugh, though. Welcome. Great to have your company tonight. Wednesday, the 12th of June, 2024, wherever you are in the world, great to have your company. It's just gone 8 o'clock. We do apologize for the delay. We do have some issues, which seems to be a weekly occurrence for us. Australian Western Standard Time. That's right. We're broadcasting from good old, little old Perth in Western Australia. Normally live on Facebook and YouTube, but Facebook has decided that those streaming live must have 100 followers, and we are nowhere near popular enough for that. We've only been going a short time. We don't yet have 100 followers, but you can see us right now if you're just hearing this for the first time. Well, actually, you won't hear it on Facebook because it's not actually connected per se. It will be on later, but not live. So we're only on YouTube. I'd love to be able to broadcast live on Facebook. So if you don't already follow us, could you please help us out? That would be amazing. So you can join in and be a part of this podcast, which runs around about an hour and a half, give or take, each week. We try to think of the various ways in which religion impacts our lives. Last week, when we talked about religious teaching in our schools, we had a good response. We asked the question, do dogs go to heaven in the past? Is God a sports fan? What would aliens make of us? We've talked about the spiritual realm as we continue to search for answers to some of the issues, which quite frankly seem quite bizarre to some. Tonight is no exception. This is another great idea from my wife, Louise. She's now a permanent fixture of this behind-the-scenes team as she comes up with the great ideas. Louise, of course, and I both shared 25 years on our walk as Christians, and needless to say, neither of us share that view anymore. And so together we try to observe how belief in God impacts so many millions of lives and why, both negatively and positively. Tonight, we're looking at some of the impacts on what can happen if you live in a religious bubble. Titled tonight, The Naivety of Religion. There's a meme going around. You might have seen it. I hope you have. It made me laugh. It is hilarious. And I've got it here in front of me. You can't see it, but to use your imagination, you'll be able to understand why. It's funny. Okay, so the meme is a bunch of American guys ranging in ages crouched down with a logo behind them for their group, which is Christian Life International, or if you like, CLI. Now, they worked out alone. They wouldn't...
Oh, Rowie, you've gone mute again. Your microphone's sabotaged you. Oh dear. Right. I do think we've lost you, Rowie. I don't know if you can hear him, Luke.
I can't, no.
And I think his audio has completely lost it for us. What I shall do is and refresh him.
I hope he's not saying anything good.
Well, you know, it's Rowie, so it could go either way.
Okay.
The audio comes back and he goes, and that's all I have to say about that.
Something's going wrong here. We've got
We lost you right at the beginning.
Again,
the audio.
Can you guys hear me? No.
Yeah, no, we can now.
You can hear me?
You.
Yeah, now we can. We couldn't before.
I can't hear you.
Oh, dear.
So hopefully what I was saying went to air.
No, we
Nah.
we
We
missed
assume
quite a
it
bit
did.
of it.
Why can't I hear you guys? Okay. Let's see if we can get something happening here, ladies and gentlemen. Technology, gotta love it. So cool. Well, everything was working before. I see my microphone has actually stopped working.
We do this every 4 or 5 episodes just to prove that we're live. This is not pre-recorded.
Okay, is that working? No, that's not working either. Right. Don't know what's happening, gentlemen. I don't know whether to continue on because I don't know whether this is actually being heard. If you're listening out there in YouTube world, let us know if you can hear me, and I'll continue on. Otherwise, otherwise we shall stop.
Yeah, we can hear you great. Got the thumbs up so Rowie can hear us, but maybe he
So
needs
what
to
you guys have both
restart.
got your thumbs up. What does that mean? I'm going to air?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay. Well, look, I shall continue on. And yeah. Okay. Hang on a sec. Right. I shall continue on then. Where were we? So many examples of blind faith or naivety. One of those in its most destructive form is those that.
Oh dear. Lost him again. I know, Tamara. We've lost him. I think what we might do is let Rowie restart his computer, reset everything, and Luke and I can run amok while he comes back in. But we'll see. We'll see how he goes.
So we're kicking Rowie off his own podcast. Is that what you're saying?
That's pretty much what we're going to do.
Dangerous.
We'll do that. I'm just going to send. I'm going to send him a message. Okay. We'll see how he goes. Let's probably bring him in again. No, he's completely gone. It's the best he's ever sounded. And he's missing out on all the roasting as well. This is
oh, brilliant, Greg.
I'm going to remove him from the stage. Unfortunately, he can't hear or see us because I think he's reading his script. So hopefully he sees the message I sent him. He's gonna figure it out soon. But I'll see if he replies to me on Facebook. You need to restart. Yes, so he's got the message. So he'll jump back in a moment. Oh, that's pretty quick. Let's see how he's going. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, I don't know what happened to your settings there, but didn't hear a single thing from like the first sentence. Although while we were waiting, your brother did pop in
the
a.
Best he's ever Yeah, good on you, Greg. Thanks for that.
Which was appreciated.
Yeah.
Tamara
said Tamara said they can hear us. Now I can't. Yes, it's the best we've ever sounded. Tamara with a grimace emoji,
a laughing face. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what happened. I really don't. Everything was working fine and dandy, and then it wasn't. So you probably didn't hear me then say the end part.
We heard none of that piece, and it looked like it was well prepared. So maybe if it's a bit of an intro, it'd be good to hear it.
Yeah, I don't know how far I should go back. What was the last thing you heard?
You said, "Hi, I'm Peter."
That's pretty much where we got to.
You're talking about the intro where I said hello to you guys, yes?
Yeah. So you said hello to us, and then you started talking about what we're talking about tonight. And it just cut out.
It cut off.
Because I said, guys, welcome, thank you. And there was silence. So I figured you didn't hear me say that. So Okay, so I'll go back and just wrap it up. It's just a short intro. And I was saying there's many examples of blind faith or naivety. One of those in its most destructive form is those that believe they are serving their God by blowing themselves up, i.e. suicide bombers, taking other innocent lives with them. Now, the reasons to justify what we consider madness could range from afterlife beliefs, choosing to die for political, ideological, or personal conviction. The list goes on. Like the example we mentioned before with that meme, naivety also can give us a laugh, but naivety in religion can also be very dangerous. It can allow those in power to corrupt. People naively believe God has given special powers to certain individuals so they can do whatever they say. Not teaching kids about sex or expecting them to abstain can have consequences of unwanted pregnancies, etc. Naivety can also make people think that they need to stop having anything to do with their families or friends, or reject their kids if they're gay. This is all too common. It's heartbreaking to hear of parents not going to their children's wedding because of religious bigotry or intolerance. We know people who have been ostracized because of religious intolerance, which to the parents, the intolerance is more powerful seemingly than the love they have for their own. So that's where I got up to. That was just a short bit. There's lots of things to talk about. Gentlemen, who wants to kick it off? And love to hear from you at home or at work, wherever you are. This is going to be a very interesting topic. Guys, either one of you, what do you think about the big question tonight, all about naivety of religion?
I'll let Rich go.
Oh, look, it's interesting. One thing springs to mind when we think about this whole thing. There's nobody, and I agree with it. The saying goes something like this: there's nobody I fear more than somebody who's absolutely convinced they're correct, they're right. And the people who, I've been in church circles most of my life. I grew up as a young fella in quite a fundamentalist Christian background. So, but I've been in some kind of quote unquote leadership in church since I was 15 years old, running something, helping something. The people who I've seen do the most damage, trample over others, those who are like completely convinced they're correct. They've got no questions left. They've only got answers, and they're the ones who are the most scary. I don't know if you know there's a Counting Crows song. I think it's Omaha, and there's this line out of it that became very relevant to me. It says something along the lines of, you ain't going to walk on water. You're just going to walk all over me. And every time I hear that, I just think, buffhead church leaders, I'm going to walk on water, but there's no water they're walking on. They're just trampling over people because they're so convinced everything's right that, they forget the people component, and people take a second place to the belief systems or the ideologies or the way they're convinced. So that's my initial sort of gut reaction. I'm like, yep, I've been there. I can tell you some good stories about being utterly rejected out of a church because of minor disagreements, but maybe we won't start with that.
That's good place as any. Yeah, look, I don't think too many people who have spent a long time in churches of varying types and degrees and positions that haven't experienced that kind of what you're talking about. Just before we move on to Luke, those people that do trample all over people because they don't have any questions, they only have answers. Do you think they genuinely believe that they do only have answers? Do you think they're that smart, or are they completely disconnected?
I've known at least one person who utterly, they're serving the Kool-Aid, but they're drunk on it themselves. They are 100% all in. There's no cynicism about what they're doing. They're what I call an absolute true believer. They're in it. Although I've encountered more, I don't want to do any church bashing, but tends to be more in the mega church end of the scale, where there's a lot of pressure to run an organization, not just to run a church, but like a successful money-making organization. I've seen far more cynicism in those kinds of circles, but certainly in the smaller churches, they're not cynical. They really are acting out, from what I can see, a genuine belief this is all how it should be, albeit quite sort of damaging and abusive in some respects. Loving in some other ways, but definitely very scarily abusive in others.
We notice that in all walks of life, don't we? In organizations, companies, businesses, whatever. We see people behaving badly. And it always amazes me, and we were having a great chat before we came on tonight, Richard and I, discussing the reasons why I don't believe and the reasons why he does, and going backwards and forwards. And I guess the confusing thing to a lot of people is that the one place you would hopefully find people behaving beautifully, lovely, caringly, it doesn't seem to matter how big the church is, whether it's tiny or whether it's humongous. There seems to be this constant flow of people loving drama and being deliberately difficult and being deliberately argumentative. And you would think, and I think that's one of the things why it keeps so many people away from religion, is that the expectation is from people that, well, if they believe in God, if they follow the character of Jesus and whatever, then surely they're going to be nice. And I have worked in Christian ministry when I was a part of the whole thing, and seriously, the people that were in there were far from acting. So it always makes me think, is that surely not, again, another little stitch of proof toward our expectations that we should be able to somehow have a peaceful world if we're all worshippers of God? I don't see that happening. I don't see that reflective in day-to-day life. It's just a constant disappointment of people. You just think, wow, your efforts to be nice are just underwhelming.
So true.
Luke, what do you think?
Yeah. I'll respond to that one first, otherwise I'll forget it before going back to the original one. I think when the message gets mixed up, and when the end, so let's talk about the end result, right? So the end game of why you would have faith. Why? What's the point of believing? If the whole point for you to be a Christian, for you to have faith, is to go to heaven, is simply to say a prayer and to end up somewhere at the end of this life, particularly when you believe that the alternative is something horrific, which we've covered before, then it doesn't matter how you go about things, really. I mean, we say that it does, but if that's your mindset, if that's your worldview, it's like the ends justify the means. If you're going to be horrible, but that gets people to say a prayer and then therefore have an eternity in heaven, they kind of go, well, that's what we need. And if we have to bully people into it, if we have to manipulate people into it, then the ends justify the means, because at the end of the day, we're doing the ultimate right thing. It's a bit too hard to do it the Jesus way, and actually love your neighbor, and maybe not even mention anything about saying a certain prayer, but showing your love. That takes too long, and the results are up and down. So it's easier to just bulldoze people, and I think that's what ends up happening, and that then you're not reflecting the character of Jesus. And it's pretty easy to be arrogant if you believe you're right and you believe the end justifies the means. Of course, if your understanding of faith is much bigger than simply some place you end up when you die, and it pertains to the world in it and life now, then it's a bit of a different story. And I think that's really the change, the pivot that needs to happen for a lot of people in the church. And I guess back to the original question about naivety in religion, it's going to be a really great topic, because I think it's an interesting title, because it almost indicates that to be religious or to ascribe to a religion is a naive thing. and I would disagree with that. But what I would say is that within religion, we see all sorts of naivety. And I think when we form these communities that become somewhat isolated and separated, us and them, insiders and outsiders, it's very easy to be sheltered. And we see this all the time with talk of the world, right? Where in the Bible there's refers to the world, and it's the most misunderstood thing ever, because it's often understood to be the world is bad. People outside of our church it's all evil and bad and full on, and we need to protect ourselves from that. We need to isolate from that, and if we have to go down to the supermarket, we'll kind of partake in it, sure. Like if we'll dip our toes in it every now and then, but ideally we want to avoid it, and that's why it's great to come together on a Sunday and in our connect groups and in our small little things, because then we don't have to deal with the real world. But that's not what's going on there. That's actually not Christianity, and I can only speak for Christianity, not for any other religion, but I would imagine other religions would be similar. But I know Christianity for certain, it's supposed to be a different way of being in the world, not an escape from it. So, because when we do escape from it, we become sheltered. When we become sheltered, that's when all sorts of naivety comes, and the funny stories and the sad stories and the angry stories that we all have, probably a handful of each of those. And
so true.
It's going to be a good chat.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize just how the separation exists between what you're talking about, Luke, and that brought back memories for myself. How I came out of a life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A singer in a band and all that. And I couldn't think of anything worse than becoming one of those super straight, obnoxious, nerdy, disconnected Christian people. That's what kept me away from it for a long time, because I'd seen them. I'd seen them standing on the corners of streets screaming out, "You don't speak in tongues, you're going to hell," and all of these other complete nutbags around the city who were doing more to convince people not. I'd look at them and go, if I end up like you, I don't want to be a part of this. And so I didn't. Why would you want to? It doesn't matter who they thought they were reflecting. What they were in reality was a bunch of dickheads who just were turning people off in droves. So I kept away for ages. And once I then ended up giving in and accepting what I thought was my inevitable life, I realized just this: it's two separate worlds. It is literally so separate. It's the world and it's us, and we're right. We've got the right deal. They're not. Probably shouldn't have a lot to do with them. I'll evangelize them and stuff like that, but that's about it. And I don't think people just really out there listening who perhaps haven't gone through that realize just how incredibly difficult it is to be separate. And it's so easy to turn your back on people who just, don't get it. When I became a Christian, I stopped watching football with my dad. I mean, why? Why would I? That's the naivety of Christianity that we're talking about. And in this particular instance, and I mean, I'm sure it happens in other religions, but I had this beautiful record collection that I'd had for a million years, threw them all in the bin because possibly they could have contained evil. And I mean, I wasn't doing this because that's the idea I came up with. I was told that that's what you needed to do. In a Pentecostal church, you don't have these things around that are evil. And I mean, seriously, it kept me away for so long. And then eventually, of course, I got to the point where I thought, well, I've got to get back out of it again and get into the real world, of which I'm a member of. I mean, my brother Greg has said the last place I would look for God would be in a church. I concur. I mean, I totally agree in that. God or good in a church, and both of those things exist to certain people. But I understand exactly what you're talking about, Greg. That's I've been there. I went to so many different churches, and it's fake city. It's a social gathering of like-minded people more than anything.
Well, it's funny because when I saw that pop up from Greg, that comment, I was like, yeah, that really speaks to why I think that when we look at church and church leadership, or people who have power, control, influence in any organization, but we're picking on sort of that naive church kind of dynamic. Why do we find that? Surely, if we're following a God of love, shouldn't the closer you get, the higher you get, the more powerful you get in the organizations, the better it gets? It seems to be inverse. And I think part of it is, it's, let's speak evolutionary, in that sort of that sense. Power, control, influence is definitely in a sort of red in tooth and claw kind of world. That's going to help you survive. The strong are going to survive because they're going to eat the weak, and you can see that kind of dynamic in that in that sort of evolutionary sense. So that seems to be like the don't use your brain. That's the default. Everybody grab as much power, and power is going to be used over other people. And if we just run by default in any of our organizations without deliberately flipping it on its head, like intentionally going against that piece, we're going to end up there. And I think we see it in every organization, and no surprise we see it in churches, because a whole lot of people are just running by default. Well, this is what you do. And we end up in the exact same place, no different to any other group of people. But when we think about, as a Christian voice, as a believer in this podcast, that's the whole point. And I think when we look at the teachings of Jesus, we see he says, if you want to see me, if you want to give God a drink, you give it to the least of these. If you want to feed, if you want to serve your God, you serve the least of these. If you want to find me, go outside the city, go away from the temple, go away from the church. And I've been talking for the longest time to people who are Christians who are looking for, quote unquote, the next move of God. If you're in that kind of world and in that kind of space, it seems natural to me, if you're looking for the next move of God, you better look at the margins of society, where people are at the margins, because that's where, in history, that's where we've always seen the evidence for God. We've very, very little evidence of God in the centers of power. We see it on the slums. We see it in homeless shelters. That's where I see the evidence of love at work. And so, Greg, the last place I would look for God would be in a church. maybe you've said something quite true there.
And I think to build on what Rich was saying, I think we, the obvious is we're not going to find that next move of God at the next church conference. No matter how hyped up it is, no matter how much we say that that's where it's all going to happen, we're going to see it on the margins, like Rich was saying, and even in marginal communities that are the least expected from a Christian perspective, the LGBTQ communities, the communities, secular communities, these other faiths, we for all our talk about how powerful God is, how big God is, how great God is, how huge God is, how transcendent God is, and every song is about that. We love talking about this, but then we say, but he can only operate in this tiny, this community or this circle or this denomination or this particular subset of society, and then the thought of God moving outside of that seems to blow our mind, or it's hard to get our heads around. But it shouldn't. We would expect to see God moving in unexpected places, in everywhere. That doesn't undermine what you do. But the problem is, I think part of human nature, we love scarcity. And you can speak to any marketing expert, any advertising expert, and it's the same principles, because it's about psychology. It's human understanding how we're wired. We like scarcity. We like to be in, but for us to be in, others have to be out. If everyone's in, it's like, if everyone can get into the club, it's not an exclusive club, is it? It's just a building. But if there's a line and if there are people that aren't allowed to come into the club, then you feel all the better for being in it. We never say this because it's a horrible thing to say, but there's something deep inside our psyche that does this, and it reflects our theology, it reflects our faith, it reflects, we project that onto God, and all of a sudden it feels really good to be the small subset of people who have the truth and who know and who understand what it's in and who's actually in. And everyone's welcome as long as you fit this small mold. But it's kind of the antithesis to a radically inclusive, wildly transcendent, loving God. But that's the thing. We need to be willing to let that go, and it's a hard thing to let go, because you let go of that, you let go of power, you let go of control, you let go of a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a lot tied up in this, and a lot of it is, I think, subconscious. These aren't communities intentionally acting this way. It's built on theology and ideas that stem from a lot of this stuff. And like you said, Rowie, it gets passed down. Someone's pastor says it, or their parents say it, and that becomes truth. And then they pass it down, and it gets a little convoluted. And I think what Rich was saying, I'll end on this. The last thing, what Rich was saying earlier about a lot of institutions, a lot of organizations will kind of act in this way, this isolated way. The problem with church and the difference with church is this isn't the organization saying it. When the church does it, they say this is what God's saying. This is how God thinks, and this is who God is, and this is what God thinks of you, and that carries a whole that's a whole nother thing, because that's really impactful. That's not the Coca-Cola organization takes this stance. Okay, no worries.
Drink Pepsi then.
Yeah. But when you're saying, but God takes this stance, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's a bit different.
Well, speaking of that, and you said the word power, which kind of jumped out at me and made me remember that I had a little pamphlet here on my desk, and I'm going to try and hold it up. Is that in reverse for you? It is, isn't it?
Oh, it's right.
Oh, it's okay. It's in reverse for me, obviously. Experience the power of God. And this is a gentleman that's coming to town, international evangelist Jerry Fussell. Now,
hold it up again. Hold it up again, Rowie. I just made it full screen so we can see it. Oh, yeah. Oh, Potter's House. Interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Of course. No surprises there.
And maybe don't scan that code if you're watching.
No,
this is not an endorsement.
Yeah, that's right.
I find that statement a part of what we're talking about, because immediately, if you have someone telling you that they are so amazingly powerful, something that you're not, so that it's very looking down your nose. I am so powerful. You're going to pay to come and see me because I'm going to get you to experience the power of God. How? What God are we talking about? It's the arrogance and the assumption that he must be talking about the God of the Bible, just assuming that everyone would know that. Of course, those who are aware of Potter's House, there was I don't know if they're international, but there's certainly many branches around Australia. But just come and experience the power. I'm going to ring up and say, how are we going to experience the power of God? What are you talking about? Explain to me what that means. Experiencing the power of God according to you. Now, you're an evangelist. Your job is to go out there and tell people about God and to make that statement. I'd love to go and just say, okay, show me the power of God. That's a claim that you're making. People will go there and expect to be healed. He claims to heal people. He does all of that. And that, again, is cashing in on the naivety of people when it comes to God. Instead of looking at it going, I need to question the hell out of this. That's a huge claim to make. He is someone connected to God, and I don't know what that means. So that's kind of like, wow. But I just thought have you guys heard of him? Jerry Fussell?
I haven't heard of him, but yeah, being a part of the Pentecostal church for a long time, I certainly know the dynamic.
Potter's House,
and it's really strange because, Pentecostals started right at the margins of society. Like, they were the scum. They were um, they were really censured back in the day, the 1900s, because of their biracial
Yeah.
gatherings, the fact that they allowed women to speak, that they allowed
Actually very
children
progressive
to run
at the
amok,
start.
that they had black leaders, in fact, disabled black leaders. I mean, all of the things that, all of that was a big reason why they were sort of hated. And they thrived. Once the movement got going, they thrived in the low socioeconomic classes. And today we find Pentecostals being these, like, instead of, hey, God is powerful and is not just an idea, but you can experience it. That's the sort of early dynamics. We've turned it into a money-making scam.
Mhm.
Come along. The only way you're going to really, I mean, it's never said this way, but it's said this way. Anybody can experience the power of God, but to really experience the power of God, you've got to go to this meeting at this house, and if you better bring an offering with you, because that's just how you do it. And I'm not saying that these people are trying to make big bucks, but the whole thing only works when all of those pieces are in place. When you have this naivety. If God, like, let's say, if God is God, the ground of all being, the reason why everything exists, and to be able to experience that is as close as the cells in your body, if God is God. And we've turned it into this thing that we've got to go to a meeting. And generally it's like white people go to the white person's meeting, black people to go to the black people's meeting. It's like very fractured, and way beside you be an Indian in this, the poor little villages there, because you got to wait for some white guy to come fly in and set up a tent for you or something. It's like we've turned it into this thing. If it's true, experience it. And if people have some kind of way to introduce you to it, great. I think it's all more power to you. But I've seen a lot of negative flows out from there, such as, well, if you want to be healed, you've got to come to me.
Yes.
Come to my meeting, and
Yep.
don't go to the doctor, because that's a lack of faith. And we saw that in the early Pentecostal history. We saw people like ministers got excommunicated if they allowed their people to go to the doctor. And you think, oh yeah, but that was like 100 years ago. That's
No.
yesterday. It's yesterday. And some people go to some churches today where that sort of naive kind of thing is happening, and we don't want that kind of dangerous sort of thought patterns going on either. And I'm not saying that minister has that kind of teaching, but there is that dynamic in some places in a very similar place.
Well, it's like lambs to a slaughter, really, for a clever, well-spoken, manipulative, charismatic person. It's money for jam to convince people, because they know that they can't question or challenge or be as well educated or influential or have an understanding of the Bible like they do. So they sit back, they lap it up. And I'm not having to go at parishioners, because I mean they're the legitimate people coming to be a part of what God is offering. And these people don't give them that. They manipulate them and say, look, if you give, obviously, but your tithe, you will get back. God will give you. I've got a scripture that I actually manipulate, twist it around a little bit to make it sound like that's what God wants you to do, because Jesus needed a lot of money back in the day, for his Ferraris that he used to have. And they're very clever at what they do. And I'm not judging. If you're listening by any chance, Evangelist Jerry Fussell, to this podcast, which I highly would not believe you are, but anyway, I'm not having to go. I think that there is an incredible amount of naivety with people, and unfortunately people will take advantage of it.
I will add this extra piece, because I'm speaking from the inside. I've seen it firsthand, and I've been a part of it firsthand, and seeing those dynamics. And there's not a bunch of, it's very rare that there's very cynical money grubbers out there, but the system is set up so that it only works a certain way. And, I'm a very contemplative Christian. I actually do, but, personally, I do believe in experiencing the actual presence and power of God. What I take great exception to is when we want to try and limit that into an event or a person as if it's not available unless you come over here. I think
At
that's
a certain time.
I think it's a very, it is dangerous because it's offloading all of your agency, all of your direct connection with the divine into somebody else's hands with no more evidence than it's just like they've put their hand up. And you go, okay, well, I'll give you all of this stuff that is my humanity and my agency and my connection and my thinking. I'm just going to give it to you for no other reason that you put your hand up. And I go, okay, I'll give it to you. If we can wind that back, I think it's a much better place to be.
Yep, couldn't agree more, mate. I'm Fenton, back with us. Good to have you. We didn't hear from you for a little while. And you also answered gave us some advice on one of our YouTube posts too, Fenton, which I have made a comment on if you want to have a look at it, because we're very interested in what you had to say. The power of tribalism is often mislabeled the power of God. Yeah, it can make you feel like you are finally home, but that's only in-group phenomena. Could not agree more, mate. That's exactly, I felt like I was finally home and I was willing to listen and do whatever is required of me to do. So, spot on. And I just want to talk about for a second, this came across my inbox today from a guy called Richard Carrier. Richard and I were discussing a little bit of this earlier, and I just want to read what he has written under the title on this article, "What's the Harm? Why Religious Belief is Always Bad," by Richard Carrier. You might remember what's his name? We're talking about him today, Hitchens,
yeah.
Whose last book he released before he died a couple of years ago was God Is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, which is a huge statement to make, and it seems crazy, but I won't talk about that now, maybe another time, but I understand what he's saying by that. And he writes, it talks a lot about Catholicism, and he calls them a rape factory. He goes after everyone big time with this and saying that religion belief is always bad. American evangelicals lobbied for the mass murder of gay people in Uganda. Hundreds of thousands of American voters have in recent years supported Kill the Gays candidates, even in the USA. In his article on Islamophobia, for that and more, and again, that's just one example that he writes about. Homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, prejudices galore all get rationalized, defended, and spread by conservative Protestant sects and Orthodox sects of every other kind. It's sects, S-E-C-T-S, just in case you're wondering. On every political issue he's ever tried lobbying for, from environmentalism to peacekeeping to fighting poverty to women's rights to stem cell research to abolishing vice laws to death with dignity legislation to improvements in tax and social welfare policy, literally everything. One group was always in my way: conservative Christians, always. Their opposition to human betterment and social progress is extensive, multifaceted, well-documented, and shameless. Faith, belief, they create and feed that monster, and that's why they must go. Now, there's lots of truth, I think, in that. I think it's generalizing probably to maybe to the, not the nth degree, but pretty close to it in those statements. They have happened, I believe, but not perhaps, and it doesn't leave an opportunity for you to say, but surely not all the time and not everyone. Well, no, that's obviously not what's happening. But I just think reading that and this whole article, it's like a horror story. And anyone that lists and calls the Catholicism a rape factory, and you go, that is disgusting. But what else would you call them? What else would you possibly call them? Even still now, it's still happening. The Catholic Church is more obsessed sex than any other religion in the world, and yet they are the perpetrators of this stuff, and they're so protective that they're quite happy for it just to go on and do nothing about it. And that is absurd. And again, the naivety of the Catholic priests and thinking that they can get away with it because they did and they could, and they still do, and it still goes on, and stuff like this just never seems to stop. Crazy.
Yeah, that article's interesting read. I don't know about Luke. You look like you had something to say there. I'll let you go for it.
No, I didn't like the article. I thought it was pretty rubbish. To be honest.
No, you read the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
What was rubbish about it?
I think he's taken the worst of the worst, and
What's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that. Call that stuff out, but you call it out in the context of what it is. You say this needs to be stamped out in this thing. So there are instances, there was a systematic problem within the Catholic Church, clearly, with abuse cover-ups and things like that is being addressed and all that sort of stuff. And I'm certain, still is, no doubt. I'm not defending that. But to paint all of Catholicism as a rape factory, that's ridiculous.
But that's not what he's saying. He's not saying all of Catholicism is a rape factory. He said Catholicism,
the Catholic Church
calls them a rape factory. I mean,
yeah, so that's what I'm saying the Catholic Church is a rape factory. But what I'm saying is these things happen. There are issues within that space, which is obviously an institution. I think it should be dealt with in the harshest things. It should be rooted out, and there should be widespread systemic change. But you can't paint every single Catholic with that brush, nor can you paint every single Catholic priest with that brush.
Because he hasn't done that. The word you'd want to concentrate on, Luke, is the word factory. That word was chosen to exemplify this hugeness, the massive amount, so many so that it's like a factory that they have created. That's the only reason why the word factory is in there. It's not labeling.
But a factory.
He would never ever suggest that he's saying all Catholics, all Catholicism throughout the world are rape factories. That's not what he's saying. As a whole.
No. But he's saying the Catholic Church is, and I'm not a Catholic, but he's saying the Catholic Church is a rape factory. Okay. If there is a glass factory, the factory produces glass. If there's a TV factory, the factory produces TV. The end result of the purpose of that factory is to produce this. A rape factory is saying that from an institutional level, what it's doing is it's creating and it is perpetuating rape as a result of the institution. So you go into that institution and you basically, that's the process you're going through. I know he's not saying every single Catholic priest is a rapist. I know he's not saying that, but there's a difference between saying there's a systemic issue, right? And we're talking the numbers. Like the numbers of this is ridiculous. There's always going to be problems within that when we're talking the numbers of an organization this size. It'd be the biggest organization in the entire world. So I'm not defending it, but what I'm saying is my problem with the article, and it wasn't just that line, my problem with the article was he's taken the very worst of say, Christianity, for example, and then said, this is why a faith, any faith, let alone a Christian faith, is fundamentally wrong because of these things, without any consideration to the fact that he is this straw man. It's the straw man art. He's painting this whole thing as if it is something that it's not. There is elements of it in there, and they should be called out. And I do call it out, and so does Rich. But you don't have to paint all of faith or all of Christianity in the same light just because there are fundamentalist aspects that act in that certain way. That's not a blight on the underlying faith. That's a blight on the individual and their interpretation of that faith. Do you know what I mean?
We lost you again, Rory.
Microphone's just gone off. Yeah, I don't think he's saying that at all. And it depends on who's reading it. Obviously, it can be, totally different depending on what your background is and what your belief system is. And I don't read it as saying that this is applicable to everyone. And I guarantee you he would say, no, that's not what I'm saying. But he speaks how I speak. He writes how I write. To me, there is no defense as Greg just called it, the evil empire. They are the evil empire. And if you can't put a label of a rape factory on an evil empire, then why would you possibly want to come up with a word to defend other than trying to save the embarrassment or humiliation of Catholic priests who may actually be good people? No one's suggesting for a second. I think the word factory is poignant because it tries to present the enormity of the situation, that he's not saying that they are producing rapists. I don't think that he's saying that at all. He wouldn't be that stupid. He's got a PhD. He's not a smart fellow, although Richard pointed out today that he didn't think the PhD label was very worthy of him.
Yeah,
but
I was very glad to have been able to rant with Rowie offline, because I had very, very harsh things to say about that article as well.
I'm looking forward to reading it. My phone was going off
Thanks,
all
Rowie,
afternoon.
for your graciousness in letting me talk to you offline about that. Was great, actually. But yeah, continue on.
I mean,
I think it's fabulous, and I just think that the light needs to be shone, and
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
To bring out, I think that
good.
And it's interesting that neither of you have recognized the truths of the article, rather than attacking the writer for saying that he's exaggerating claims.
It's the first thing I said. The first thing I said is he's picked bits of stuff that is absolute truth and that needs to be called out, but he has then extrapolated that out as a reason why. And look at what's the title of the article? Why belief in God is bad, or is always bad. Is always bad. So okay, let's call out the systemic issues within the Catholic Church, and I agree. And talk about evil empire. It's an area of study, empire, and I'm anti-empire. Whether it's an institution, whether it's an actual empire, I'm all for that, and I see how the Catholic Church can operate in that way. But when you take something like that, these events, and then you use that, like systemic corruption within an organization, as reason why a belief in God is always bad, that's a bad argument. When you take fundamentalist Christians, Westboro Baptist, or even lesser fundamentalists, like your fire and brimstone sort of corner church that anti-inclusive, all that sort of stuff. When you take that and you say this is why a belief in God is always bad, that's a bad argument. It's like, call these things out, but
Can I explain why that claim has been made? And Christopher Hitchens said it as well in his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Now, you need to understand what he means by that. And I started analysing. I thought, don't be ridiculous. Of course it can't poison everything. How? And where he's coming from, and probably with this other guy, Richard, as well, the author. And I talked to Richard about this. We didn't end up working out whether or not there was any level of agreement or whatever, but to say it's the initial desire to be associated with something, like I've got an imaginary friend. That in itself, it's not about religion per se. It's the fact that you are willing to cross over into believe into something which sets you up to believe in so many things that may not be true, because you're willing to believe in something without empirical evidence for what people expect. And Richard talked about empirical evidence in love and how that can't be shown. That's true, but it doesn't take away the fact that people need to be shown to believe something 100%. Empirical evidence in the truth, in facts that can't be overturned. And if you step into that realm, that is what they're saying. From there on in, you are a part of something which leaves you open to being connected with all sorts of, I don't know. It's hard to put into words, and it's like Lawrence Krauss's claim that something can come from nothing. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But I'm quite happy with the fact that if you are willing to commit your life to believing in something that isn't real, that is a fair statement to believe. I believe that religion, by and large, per se, is bad. And I know that
I mean,
doesn't sound. That doesn't. I know that doesn't sound. I haven't articulated it very gracefully. But if you read Hitchens' book, you'll get more of an understanding on what it is that he's talking about.
I've read it, yeah,
Okay.
and so I know Hitchens' argument that, and I mean, you articulated it great. I still think just because Hitchens said it, that doesn't make it true. Very intelligent man, but
Well, I
doesn't
don't
mean
believe it
doesn't
because
mean-
Hitchens said it. I believe it because it makes perfect sense to me. There's
no,
a
that's
whole
great.
world of religion and believes in God across so many different countries and so many different types of religion, and to have to look at what's happened since the beginning, and then to try and wrap it all up and go, no, I think religion across the board can be really good. Well, I've never seen an example of something that can't be corrupt or bought or twisted or changed, and the whole concept, Luke, of believing in stuff that isn't real has to be labeled as something.
Yeah, but your definition of empirical evidence, or Hitchens' definition of empirical evidence, doesn't determine whether something's real or true or not. That's the thing. You can't say that God isn't real just because we can't empirically measure the activity of God. I would argue that if we can empirically provide empirical evidence of, okay, here's a metaphysical evidence of God, right? That's not God. If we can understand it, if we can wrap our heads around it, if we can measure it, if we can control it, it can't be God. God in itself is transcendent. It's just the language that we use, right? It's not we've spoken about this before. God is not an imaginary friend sitting up on a cloud in the sky. That might be some people.
How do you know? You don't know where God is, or what God is, or what he's made up of. We have no idea. That's why I was saying to Rich Stuffing why this is just such a circular, confusing situation, because you can't claim that about God. Maybe God is everything that people have always thought he was. The idea comes from, of course, the gods of the past and how they were placed in our lives for comfort and for explanation. How do you know what the God is that you believe in? You've never spoken to him, you've never seen him, you've never met him, you've got no idea.
My point is Hitchens' argument, your argument, this bloke's who wrote the article's argument, is the idea that is their picture of God, the imaginary friend, the old man with the beard in the sky, right? What I'm saying is,
you've got to pick one. Might as well be that one.
Well, yeah, because that's an easy one to shoot down, because that's the imaginary friend.
Well, what
I'm saying is, God is language that we use. The word God, we are limited with the language that we use. But what that actually refers to is our actual being, the very existence of life itself. And it is transcendent. It is something that we cannot metaphysically measure or control. And that's a good thing, because if we can understand fully of what God is, that's not God. The fact that we can't measure it within the environment that we have, like we do and treat other sciences, does not mean that God is not real and that God does not exist. You're welcome to think that. Anyone's welcome to think that. I don't think it's a strong argument, because there are philosophical arguments against it. There's obviously theological arguments against it. There's a whole range of thinking around it that understands that that's a very simplistic view of God. The imaginary friend, believing in an imaginary friend, it's just a very, very basic simplicity, and it's easy to shoot down. But
only because you're putting your views of what you think an imaginary friend would look like and reducing it to someone will walk a little 6-year-old girl walking along holding hands with someone.
What's Hitchens doing? What's Hitchens doing? He's doing the exact same thing.
No, well, you don't know. You don't know what he's doing and why he's doing it. The same as I don't know why you're doing.
He just
what
said,
you're doing.
Hitchens said this idea of God, this belief in something that we can't understand or measure, that is effectively the belief in an imaginary friend, poisons everything from that. That's the starting point, and everything that flows from that is then poisoned because of that starting point. I'm just using the language Hitchens used, and I'm using the language that the guy in the article wrote.
Well, that's
their understanding
that I used rather than Hitchens, but.
What I'm saying is the idea of God is so much bigger than that, and it should be, and that's a good thing.
But then you don't know that either, Luke. You're making sweeping statements about God as if you're actually sitting next to you and you know him intimately. Now, if I believe that he doesn't exist at all, then one of us is a complete nut. If he doesn't exist at all, then this conversation is like, wow.
And so that right there, that's the dichotomy that I think undoes all of the whole new atheists, right? And these are intelligent men. You're an intelligent man. I'm an intelligent man. We have great conversations on this. See, the difference is I fully understand that you can be an atheist, and that can be you can be an intelligent, rational atheist. So that you've landed there. That's where your rationale has got you, and I understand it and I get it. I also think you can have faith. You can have a belief in something beyond our understanding, something that is the great unmoved mover, the uncaused cause, the something that knits everything together, right? That we might not be able to fully scientifically understand, but there is, I believe in that transcendent thing, a faith, an intelligent faith, one that is rational, that has been arrived at, not through manipulation or through psychological, like a belief system that I just want to have an imaginary friend, but something that's been thought through and considered, and actually you can land to have a faith and it be a rational outcome, just as you can land to be an
I did that
atheist
for 25 years.
Rational.
You're not
I'm
talking
not
to
forgetting
someone
that at
who
all.
doesn't know on that side. I did that for 25 years. I know exactly what you're talking about.
No,
Which
but
is
what I'm
why I'm
saying
so
is,
able. But you're
but what
saying
I'm
that I
saying,
can experience that. I'm telling you, I already did.
I'm not saying I've got no interest in converting you. I've got
No,
I could care less about that. What I'm saying is I understand your journey and I fully respect, and I don't think it's an unintelligent or a lunatic decision to end up an atheist. I get it. It's a rational decision.
It's
But
a
that you can
logical decision.
sure.
It is
But
more
you can end
logical
up
to assume there is no God than there is a God.
But you can end up having a faith and having a belief in God, and that be a rational and logical decision as well. It's a false dichotomy. They're not the antithesis to one another. They're two different destinations that may have come from similar journeys that people have ended up at that. And I can understand that. To demonize one or the other, if I was sitting here saying, you're a moron if you're an atheist, if you don't believe in God, how ridiculous, you got no brain cells, and that which some of the vitriol that we see coming across from some of these new atheists, it's offensive because it's a real simplistic view of faith. And it might be some people's faith and it might be some fundamentalist ideas of God, but it takes into no consideration any of the incredibly thoughtful work of the last 2,000 years of numerous theologians from numerous different denominations, Catholic, Anglican, Protestant, Pentecostal, all sorts of stuff.
Well, let's talk about the people we do know, not the people we don't know. I know there are atheists out there. There are angry, horrible people on both sides of the fence. And let's not have a straw poll onto what we think is the worst offenders, because it is on both sides. I know atheists that are embarrassing. I mean, they're not. We need to remember that atheist word is thrown around like religion is a collective. Atheism is not. Atheism is not a group or a club or anything that we share together to help each other believe in the same thing. I don't talk to any atheists for any sense of direction or acceptance or well-being. I make the decision totally on my own. I don't even like calling myself an atheist. I just have not seen enough evidence to prove to me that there is a God. So until that happens, I'm quite happy to just sit here going, well, at the moment, I can't see anything. I did think that I experienced something for that time. Now I don't. And there you are. So it leaves me in a perfectly comfortable position to sit there and look at and read articles like what this guy Richard had written, and to say I can understand totally where he is coming from. You can tick many boxes about the accuracy and historical relevance of what he's saying. From as far as I'm concerned, it's just as easy to say everything he's saying is generalizing and exaggerated and wrong, and because that's what we do as human beings. We look at something, we read it, and we have a different understanding and trying to work out what it is that he's saying it and why is he saying it. Is it just anger? Has he got experience? I mean, everything. I haven't got the time to go through every single claim that he's made and try and disprove it. what I can do is apply my experience as a Christian and as an atheist and make a rational decision based upon what I've read, what I've seen, what I know. I've been around for 67 years. I have learned some stuff that I can apply to stuff like that and go, okay, well, I know there are historical things, he didn't actually mention in particular, but I mean, I know, in Africa, the amount of people the millions of people who have died because the Catholic Church insists on not letting them wear condoms and trying to get abstinence as the only rational decision to make to stop the death toll. And this is, and I know it's back on the Catholic thing and that, but I think there's just, you throw enough mud, eventually something sticks.
Oh, for sure. And I think those things need to be called out 100%. In fact, half the time Rich and I are in trouble because we're the ones calling them out from the inside. And that gets into all sorts of strife because you're not supposed to, but we do because they're important. The fact that he's calling this stuff out, I'm all for. I think that's great. It's the extrapolation. It's the saying this happens, therefore this, I think is too big a leap. And also there's selective history and revisionist history. It's like, you can call out that in Africa, which you should, but then what do we do with the Christian organizations that are on the ground and risking their life within incredible civil wars to help women there give birth safely or to be able to have mobile clinics and that? And they do that as part of their Christian worldview, their faith. We don't mention that.
That's the yin and the yang. The good does not undo all the bad, and the bad does not undo all the good.
No, but if we only mention the bad, and we don't mention
to fight an argument of a Christian group or whatever religion has done as bad, to fight it with what about all the good stuff they've done? I don't know if you've ever seen it, Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens with the debate: is the Catholic Church a force for good or evil? It mentions it in this particular article. Go and have a look at it, and it's fantastic. Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry, they talk about the history of the Catholic Church, and it's amazing. It is fantastic. At the end, people vote who they thought was right and wrong. I mean, the Catholic argument was just ridiculous, and I don't subscribe to. Forget about the bad things they did. Let's just talk about the good things that they did. I don't think that's something that's naivety in itself.
Of course it is. Yeah. No, that would be just as bad as doing the opposite and forgetting all the good things and only doing the bad things. And the Catholic Church may not be a force. That may have been the worst thing ever. It wouldn't surprise me. I think when the church was wedded to empire with Constantine, in the year sort of 300, that was the beginning of the end. So I'm all for that, but let's not confuse the Catholic Church with Christianity, and even Christianity with faith in God. I mean, that's another layer up. I think to extrapolate that out and say, hey, the Catholic Church has been cactus and has done some really bad things, more bad things than good, therefore God doesn't exist. It's just not a sound argument. Call out the stuff that they do, but it just loses me when you extrapolate it out that far. And we go,
I don't think I made the claim that because they're like that God doesn't exist.
You didn't. But this article is saying a belief in God. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying to forget all the bad to just focus on the good. What I'm saying is, you can't do either way. You have to hold them both, and you got to weigh it up. But also, we've got to remember, religion is man's attempt to work out this on earth. It's not. You can really get it wrong, but that's an indictment on you, on us, not on God necessarily. So this is the thing. I mean, we can say we've messed up with charity, and in taking advantage, or the prosperity gospel and all that sort of stuff. But then Christians invented charity, the whole idea of charity, charity for the poor. Charity was around pre-Christians, but it wasn't charity for those who need it the most. It was charity for those within your social circle who deserved it and who could then be reciprocal to you. That was that was what philanthropy was. That's what charity was. There was no such thing as giving to the poor, because what can the poor give back to you? They can't give anything back to you That's why it was a radical notion. So does the church now misuse finances and charity and things? Absolutely. And we should be calling that out. But we also need to remember the whole idea of it was invented way back closer to the original event being the teachings of Jesus. So that's just my point. And I'm not having a go at anyone or atheists. Like I said, I think we can both peacefully coexist. And I actually have respect for landing as an atheist or landing with faith as rational and logical endpoints to a journey. But I think when we demonize the other without actually being considered the full scope of the argument, it just undoes the credibility for me. To call out those things and then also say, listen, this is what makes me question things is a whole different thing to taking it that far, because it's then being driven by something else. It is tribalism. It might not be in a church, but atheism, particularly not all atheism, but there are elements of the new atheist movement that is itself tribalism. It's all mimetic. It's René Girard's work on mimetic desire and scapegoating, and it goes both ways.
I even find the word atheism to be meaningless because it makes it sound like it's a belief system within itself. Every single person in the world is an atheist if they don't believe in any God. They're atheist to the gods, which so doesn't make sense. Fenton, my biggest issue with that institution, talking about Catholics, I assume, is the missionaries and the colonization. I think the sexual power comes from bringing God to the savages. Ooh.
Yeah.
That'd be a great topic. We should do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah,
I agree.
Wow.
And I think it comes back into that power thing again. Instead of coming to serve and to learn and to humbly, through love, offer them a connection with God that can be taken or not, they're coming with, I'm going to come and sort you guys out because I've got all the answers and you need them. And that imbalance in power is exactly what we saw. We saw it here in our state. Some of the worst things happened when the church got involved, unfortunately. I've heard them. I've sat with the mother, an old Aboriginal elder, and just listened to the stories of her and her parents. And I'm like, I had just heartbroken. But then again, the wisdom that came from that lady of because we asked her, I said, how are you not just perpetually enraged? And she said a couple of things. She said, first of all, you can't change the past, but if you become enraged like that, you actually perpetuate that evil. She's more interested in making the world that much little bit better for her child, who's making it that much better for her child, and so on. I was like, wow. So easy for me as a white fella to say that, but to sit there in silence and just go, that was incredible. And like what Luke said, church has got to own it.
Yeah.
And which they've said the words. I'm talking about the Catholic Church. But it's all over. They've said the words, but how much money have you got to make it right? And not a cent gets spent. This is not repentance. Repentance makes things right again. Yeah. And so, And
repentance is an action.
I'm preaching to myself here. How many times have I said, well, that's really, really sad, and then happily just closed my door and forgot about what's going on?
You're not alone, Rich. Greg's saying you don't need religion to understand the nature of reality and intelligent design. Now, I can understand the nature of reality. That's true. I need to know what you mean by intelligent design, Greg. Are you saying the God of the gaps? Are you saying that the world, everything we see, is designed by God? Because that's normally the association with intelligent design. And then follows up with, does God exist or not? Yes.
Hey, I'll drop a bombshell on the previous one. Intelligent design, especially. Again, because and I think Greg might be thinking about something different, but often when we think about intelligent design in the context of religion and that sort of evolution creation debate, it really is. We need intelligent design because there's all these gaps, and those gaps are filled with a God mind that sort of fills it in. Okay, that's all right. If that was true, then God wouldn't exist. If we needed a mind to fill in gaps in creation, that means God is in fact not the ground of all reality. In fact, my view and understanding of God depends on the unity of the intelligibility of creation itself, or of the world as we see it. If I got to a point and we were absolutely convinced that science has proven there's something, that some external mind had to come and hold those two pieces together, otherwise the whole thing's shot, that means that the God who is the ground of all reality, whose infinite being and intelligence and mind holds all things together, there's a gap in reality. That means that whole concept of God is false. So you'd actually prove the God I understand does not exist. So that intelligent design is actually the total opposite for people who see God in our way, which is really weird, and it's a bit mind-bending. But maybe I think what Greg is really talking about, because I know Greg's not a church religion kind of guy.
Yeah.
Maybe he's saying he sees the beauty of infinite mind in everything. And I go out to nature and I'm overwhelmed I don't see just a bunch of mindless atoms banging together. I do see beauty and truth and mind, all spelt with capitals that are transcendent in that place.
Yeah.
Are you going to give this one a go? Does God exist or not? Yes. He's speaking our language.
I love that.
Yeah.
But I think there's I see some synergy between both Fenton and Greg's comments. And the reason I say that is because both of them speak to a relationship or a view or an understanding of there being something more, whatever language we want to use, right? God, the divine. Some people say the universe. Yeah, I could care less about the language, to tell you the truth. But this idea that there is something more, something that kind of holds things together. This we from a missionary perspective, and I think even you said, Rich, when we come in, the idea was we're going to come in and we're going to tell you about God, and we're going to introduce you so you guys can have an experience with God. Instead of coming in and saying, teach us about your culture and how you are already interacting with God, which is a totally different thing. It's like you might be using language or theology or all sorts of stuff that's different to how we would express it. But how do you interact with God? Instead of saying, you don't know God, you're heathens, let me come and show you this is how it is, right? Because that leads to all sorts of problems. And that's exactly, I think, what Greg is saying. And that's a big problem with colonization in the past. And it's what Greg's saying, that you don't need religion to understand that the nature of reality and intelligent design. It's that age-old thing. What if someone never hears about anything? They never experience Christian missionary. They live on Sentinel Island, and but they understand that there's something more or whatever. What is God not there? Is God not with that person because they haven't had some white person come in and show them a Bible? Is that really what our theology has come down to? Is that what we think missionary work is? And do we not see that how damaging that can be? I mean, I think it's a whole topic on itself, really. That understanding of interacting with God without religion. But I think it would be a very, very silly thing to assume that you need religion in order to acknowledge that there is God or interact with God. Religion, we get it wrong all the time because it's a man-made thing. God didn't create religion, we did. It's our attempt to put a framework and a structure around something that we can't possibly fully understand. We can't.
By definition.
The Bible's great. It helps, and there's wisdom and there's all sorts of stuff there. but it doesn't give us everything. We cannot, like, it's not. That's where it starts to fall apart, because God's bigger than that. It's not contained inside a box. It's not a he. It's not a she. God's so much bigger. We need to understand that. Once we realize that, and that we cannot contain our understanding of God into just one simple religion, it makes loving your neighbor much easier. Because if your neighbor doesn't believe the same thing that you do, or doesn't believe at all, well, when your conception of God is, that's okay. God's hard to get our head around. But here's what matters, is how we practice either our unbelief or our belief. How that functions in the world, I think, matters far more than the dogma that we get caught up in. That just frees the way to love. And then as we love, we're experiencing God. That because God is love. So it's like we're participating in it. I think we just mess it all up. What's Greg said here.
The complexity of the human brain cannot be a result of evolution. There's two huge claims in a row, Greg. I think you need to I need to back it up somehow. Does God exist? You say yes. The complexity of the human brain cannot be a result of evolution. Wow. Okay. I'm assuming you have some sort of proof for that statement, because that's a biggie. That's a biggie.
It is a big one. And
no bigger.
I can't speak to it personally about evolution and brain stuff, because I really haven't, I'm not trained in, I haven't read enough. I'll be interested in what Greg's come across. But from my end, I'm more interested in the philosophy side of things. And I would say, I don't know about that, but what I do suspect quite clearly is that human intelligence and our experience of the world, especially first-person phenomena, the idea that I'm looking out at the world, intentionally manipulating the world, that starts with an intention that ends up with change in the world, cannot be explained with a purely physicalist, brain-based, like atoms in the brain doing its thing, and that's the result is everything we experience. By definition, it cannot, and that's why we have people like Daniel Dennett, rest in peace. I think we've lost him fairly recently.
Man.
Only a few months ago.
Okay.
Which, again, Christopher Hitchens, out of the whole new atheist people, Christopher Hitchens was always, I had a soft spot for him, because I really liked what he said. I'm going to digress slightly. It was really telling that he was the one who's really willing to debate the Christians far more than the others, because I think he had a far connection with it all. But anyway, Daniel Dennett was another one. And I think he had a lot more to give. Unfortunately, we lost him. But Daniel Dennett, I think, got the right end of the stick. He understood that if there was nothing more to reality than empirically identifiable physical processes and mechanisms, then our consciousness is largely an illusion. It doesn't really exist. And that's where he was going with a lot of his writings. You either can hold on to a purely mechanistic physicalist universe, but you can't hold on to consciousness at the same time. You've got to let go of one of them. And Dennett was willing to start to let go of the reality of consciousness, because he was absolutely convinced of the reality of a mechanistic physicalist universe. With no evidence except a prior claim that believes that the physical universe is all there is.
I think that's why the waters get so muddy, isn't it? Because
but it's really interesting. Daniel Dennett is really worth reading. A lot of Christians go, "Oh, don't read him, blah blah blah, new atheist," and they kick up a stink and say you're going to rot your brain. The guy's super intelligent, and it's very well worth reading some of his stuff. Because
I've had a look at some of his stuff, but not as much, because he just wasn't with that populist group of.
He was more on the fringe, wasn't he? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but I will have a listen and check it out. Certainly.
Yeah, I like him, and he's got the beard. He's got the whole package as well.
He
He's
even
pretty
looks
cool.
like God, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're not going to believe in God, at least you still get your bearded guy. You know what I mean?
Correct. This is how we muddy what are already incredibly dark, stagnant waters in the discussion between the existence of God. When we start doing what Daniel Dennett did, saying, I have no reason to believe this other than blah, 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 because we find ourselves, and everyone has a right to have an opinion on what they think we are. Let's face it, we probably should, because sure as hell we don't know all of the answers, and probably never will, as the universe continues to grow and change and whatever. So I'm a bit I'm a little bit dubious about people making scientific claims without actually the understanding or the knowledge of science, i.e. the complexity of human brain cannot be a result of evolution. I mean, that's just, you can't know that, Greg. He's followed up with ambiguous comments. Sorry, does God exist? Yes. Does God not exist? Yes. Oh, I see. Yeah, it was very ambiguous. So I thought that was a bit strange that you would say, does God exist or not? Yes. So the answer is, does he or does he not? The answer is still yes, or it could be no. Either way, I just think that it is. Yeah, it's a fascinatingly exhausting conversation when we're coming from so many different directions, and normally it's even a bit more, I guess, complex in a way with Jason and Suresh here, but obviously both the guys got held up tonight. Love to hear your comments. We're still going. We'll probably go for another 10, 15 minutes or whatever before one of us falls asleep. So if you've got any more comments, been good tonight from Tamara, also Greg and Fenton, but let's mosey on into the depth and murky inner wafflings of a podcast host.
It does tie back in, though, doesn't it? It ties back into the naivety of religion. Yeah, where we've landed talking about. I think the biggest, one of the most naive claims that any religion can make is this is exactly the bounds of God. Now, this is how God operates fully. Yep. Now, you can make claims, as I do, from a Christian perspective, of the nature of God, and God is love, and God is good, and God is not this Zeus sort of figure. And I understand that people can contend those claims. I fully respect that. But I think you can make claims about God, but to take it to the extent of saying, this is exactly fully God is fully contained within this. It is an extremely naive thing to do, and it undermines, like, really, your concept of God is small enough that you've got it figured out. It's God's fully enclosed in this theological framework that you have. There's no room for God acting outside of that or in ways that you aren't expecting. All this sort of stuff. I think that's an extreme naive position for religion to take. And I think once any religion falls into that trap, it's very hard to claw your way out. That's why you almost need to disrupt that by coming out of that. But yeah, it's I like how we've ended up there. We've ended up answering one of those questions.
It's the breadth that always fascinates me. From a 3-year-old child can have a concept of what God is, the same concept they have of Santa and Father Christmas and fairies, and we talked about that, and right through to the most extraordinarily gifted Stephen Hawking type people of who. And what I find strange, and what I find incredibly frustrating about the journey, is that any discussion point for me, I like to get some degree of resolve, some sense of that was all worth it because we got to hear. And yet the difference between a 3-year-old child and Stephen Hawking's, there's no proof or evidence or experience whatsoever that can differentiate between the two. Stephen Hawking is no more intelligent enough to be able to have an idea, a learned concept, yes, because of who he is and what he studied, and as much as a 3-year-old child may actually have the complete idea of what God is. And it's extraordinary that is the situation for everyone in between those ages, and everyone in between the times, and the next 100 years, and the next 100 years, and the next 100 years. And I doubt very much whether we will ever get to the situation. The only way out of it, because God can't be unproven. I don't think there's any possible way that science or anything could possibly unprove the existence of God. Different for the character of Jesus, that can certainly, through archaeological discoveries, could be disproven. That is irrelevant, because I think, God exists without Jesus. So that part of it will never change. But as far as being able to discover, the only way I can see of us saying, wow, done, your beauty, we are there, sign off on this, God does exist, is by God proving to us that he exists. You can't show it through science that I can think of. You can't prove it. To date, there's been no evidence put forward that is conclusive. So I think that's the only way out. That can be proven somehow if God is real, by him proving to us that he is real. I don't think science can disprove the existence of God. But hey, that's my humble opinion, and it may be completely wrong, or it may be completely right. I've got no idea. I think that sits well with my logical brain. And discussing it for the next God knows how many years is not going to bring us any closer to an understanding of whether it's true or real or not. What can change is our desire to change our belief. You guys might say something and go, bang, I never thought of that. Wow, I'm in, hook, line, and sinker. I realize I feel God now, blah, blah. Or the opposite of you both finally admitting, going, Rowie, we didn't know how good you were, mate. Sorry, we're out. We're done. We're done. Let's change the name now. An atheist walk into a bar. There are options, ladies and gentlemen, of the jury.
You know what I love? Because that, Rowie, that speaks to we're all on a journey, and everyone is.
Absolutely.
And the beauty of it is, we're at this point in time in each of our journeys, spiritual, and being an atheist is a part of a spiritual journey. It's the part where, and it may be the end of, for many people, where they go, this is where I've landed. But the interesting thing is, even if you look at incredibly well-known people in history, like from the science perspective. So Werner, one of my favorite quotes, Werner Heisenberg, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, incredible scientist. He's got this quote that says, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. You can only say something like that at the end. Do you know what I mean? After you've been on this journey. And for some, like they don't find God at the end, and that's okay. But it's just a beautiful picture of, you can spend your whole life committed to science and natural sciences and understanding the physical mechanism processes of everything, and still go, I feel that there's something more. And that's not right or wrong. It's not empirically proven, but that's where that person's landed. And so it's these conversations are great, but it's important that we understand that we might not be the same people in 10 years' time. And we shouldn't be. We definitely shouldn't be. If we are, we've done something wrong. It doesn't mean that we'll change our position, or maybe we have, but it's it's a beautiful thing to recognize.
I don't think there's too many people who don't believe that.
Oh, we lost you,
Bloody
Rowie.
microphone went off. Yeah, I don't think there's too many people who don't think that there's nothing. There are people who think that, and why not? We've got every reason to think that. And the sad thing for me, ironically, is when you finally pass, you don't have a chance to come back and go, see, I told you, you were bloody well wrong. If there is nothing, then you come back and go, you were actually right. So that's a shame that you pass and you never get a chance to fulfill whether you were right or wrong or anything in between.
See, that's Rowie's version of heaven, to come back and tell everybody he was right.
All wrong.
Yeah.
I tell them I was right.
Exactly.
The last thing, well, I can't possibly ever think that I am right about this, because that would be ridiculously arrogant to suggest that I have some sort of an understanding of reality that everyone else doesn't. And all I have is the experience of what I experienced. I didn't believe, then I did believe, and then I don't believe. There's nothing to say that may not be another change. I don't know. I'm at the point now. I really don't need to find out. I really don't care. I just am happy going through life. All the things that are real. Love of the kids, the grandies, our children, and everything that's beautiful and lovely and going on. That's a treasure. That's to live for. Now I don't want to think of the possibility that there might be a heaven, and it's fantastic. I want the fantastic to be now, or as good it can possibly be. I don't want to cash in my chips and say, well, I don't give about stuff about now. I'll worry about that when I get to heaven. I don't believe it exists. I have no reason to believe that it exists. I have reason to want it to exist, but they're not the same, unfortunately. So,
Well said, Rowie.
But you know what? If that belief that heaven doesn't exist causes you to live life now and to love others, which I know you do, love those around you better now, because there's not another opportunity one day and sitting on a cloud with a harp, that's a great thing. That means that the way your unbelief is functioning is far better than the way some people's belief in that is functioning. So that's my whole point. Whatever is right, whether heaven exists or not, is almost irrelevant at this point, because it's about how does your belief or unbelief functions in that respect that actually makes the difference now. That's for me. It's a big thing.
I think one of the great things about faith, which you'd never want to take away from people, is two things that I've noticed, and that is that the belief that heaven exists, it harms no one to believe that. And if that gives you an incredible amount of comfort, so be it. Go for it. No one has got the right to turn around and say, well, actually, no, it doesn't. For me, I can't believe it, and I can't not believe it. I'm just somewhere in between. The other thing that always staggers me, and I love it, it puts a smile on my face, and it's very cute, is when someone's just passed and they say Auntie Di's gone up to be with her, Uncle Bob or whatever, and they're reunited in heaven. And I mean, I see that and I think, well, okay, I'm not going to diss anyone for believing in that. That gets people through the most difficult times in their lives of knowing. I mean, the thought of me catching up with my dad, I've only got to think about it for a second and it will start me crying, because you go through everything when someone dies, the things that you wish, and you never did. Or seeing my mum, or seeing anyone who's special and they've passed. But if it happens, it happens. I can't do anything about it. I can't control it. It is what it is. I probably need to be, conscious of brownie points just in case. They had 2 bob each way. What's that?
What's his name?
Razor. I forgot.
Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, that's a
you might as well believe it. You got
it's a great example, though, of a belief bringing so that belief that someone's going to be reunited with their loved one, bringing hope and love and comfort and healing to that person who's left here. Yeah, the way that belief is functioning is beautiful. That's where I struggle with the claim that any form of belief in God is poisonous. Belief in God can
No,
result in, and I'm
there's
not.
no one ever said the belief in God is poisonous. The person's belief can't be poisonous. It's the greater organization or of religion as a whole. I don't think even he said that. I don't think he said belief in God is poisonous. Believing in God might be poisonous. Belief in God is different. Do you understand the distinction between the two?
As in acting out, believing being the action.
Well, but believing in God doesn't necessarily believing in the concept and the idea of a God seems to me it can be separate from a belief in God. If you're believing in God, you don't necessarily have to believe in miracles and stuff like that. So there's all the stuff that you can have as a belief in
like
God,
the teachings of the religion. Yeah.
separate to believing in God. I think there's a distinction between the two, and I think that what you're saying, I agree, but I just want to clarify in case anyone thought that I said believing in God is poisonous.
Oh,
That's certainly
no.
Believing
You
in
definitely
God, if it gets you through, it got me through a hell of a time in my life, so I would never say that.
No. And definitely, to clarify, I wasn't saying that you said it. It was more like from our conversation before, whether it was Hitchens or the article, I couldn't remember. But and that's what I was going to say was that's the difference, because that's a belief in God that is not poisonous. That's functioning in a beautiful way. But someone else's belief in God can actually serve to function in poisonous ways, and in ways that then further poison different things, Christian nationalism and, obviously crusades and all the obvious examples, but even the more subtle ones. So it's like, can a belief in God and religion act in poisonous ways? Absolutely. And we see it all the time. But belief in God, as you just said, belief in God in itself is not poison. It's not like that's the poison chalice and everything flows from that, but it can go in different ways. And that's, I think, the challenge, right? For those who do believe is, how is this functioning? How is my belief actually functioning? Is it acting in poisonous ways, or is it acting in ways that bring healing?
Yeah, so good.
Yeah. Okay. It's coming up to 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock? God,
it is.
Too, It always sounds weird when I say 10 o'clock when we start. Well, allegedly we start at 8.
We pretend to.
Yeah, I know. So we all good?
Yeah, look, I think for me, when you said about science can't prove God and science can't disprove God, it's like this. I don't think we're ever going to get a closure on it. Certainly not in our lifetime, and I don't think it's something that can get closure. And I agree. And I was like, well, then what now? What do we do with this? And for part of it is I recognize my place in history and culture, and I know where I sit. So I've got to be very reflective about my place, and then be quite humble in that place. So I don't go, with weird ideas about everybody has to be a tongue-speaking Christian, or they don't go to heaven, kind of, that kind of stuff as well. Like, most of the world isn't Jews. Do you think there's like several thousand people and that's it? God loses anyway. So I'm very conscious about that. So that's one way. What Luke is talking about, how my beliefs function, but I'm a bit of a noggin. So a part of what really interests me in this whole space is living a life of integrity. So there's some things I'll say, this is real, and that means something else can't be real, because they can't be both at the same time. So I don't want to just check my brain at the door and just claim both things are real. So if this is real, it has implications on what else I can say is real. So I want to get that sort of, that's interesting to me. But if I say something's real, I actually want my life to reflect that. And I think the conversation, we end up like going on very sharp disagreements all there, but we often end up in the same place, because I think we're all in that place of wanting to live that out. And that's why I think books like very interesting by Daniel Dennett, because I think he is the most honest physicalist naturalist I've seen, because he says if this is all, if the physical mechanistic universe is all there is, these are the conclusions you have to make. Very courageous about wrestling with that. And I think it's well worth reading for that kind of honest sort of intellectual wrestling. He doesn't come up with a good conclusion, but he's quite honest in his sort of conclusion. So I think that's a good way to go. Even if you can't nail down the God question, how you sort of wrestle with it can be quite good. But when it comes to, Christians, and there's a lot of, we were talking about naive things. I know some people might end up hearing this sort of clip at the end who are wrestling with the faith and all that sort of stuff. If you're happy in church, turn off the podcast now and just be happy in church. But for those who are really wrestling with it and they're troubled by it all, you are allowed to believe a whole lot of stuff and still be an orthodox, dinky-die Christian, and I won't go through and list them because this is not the podcast for it. But as we've been talking about, you may end up being an atheist, and that may be a very logical, necessary, and healthy place to be. Or you may end up still being a Christian. But I think we all agree what you don't want to stay is an angry fundamentalist of any stripe, whether Christian or atheist. Those guys are angry, and fundamentalism poisons everything. So
Yeah.
That's my little takeaway from thinking about this. Maybe it's not religion. Maybe it's actually fundamentalism is the actual thing that poisons everything. A whole bunch of angry, judgmental people run around pointing fingers and poo-pooing the other people because they think different, have different experiences and are at different places in their journey and attack rather than wrestling with things and pushing each other forward and further up. Anyway, that's my piece, and I'll rest there.
No, I like that because I kind of makes me wonder how often I am a fundamentalist in for different reasons than just being angry at Christians. For me, the source is from an unusual place as we've talked about of coming out of religion and in doing a lot of investigation into the Hitchens, Harris, all of the Daniel Dennett kind of trying to figure out what the alternative is, and is it something worthy and real, and could it be true? And so to answer those questions, could it be true? The simple answer is, well, it can be whatever, but I don't know, and it doesn't matter at this stage. So out of the frustration I initially had when I wanted to do this podcast, that's changed a lot. And what you said there, to me, the most important word in the English language to me is integrity.
Yeah,
I think that is, and that's one of the sad things about people who live off the goodness of their belief in God, and people who have no integrity. And that's why it's such a confusing mess. I feel so sorry for every person out there trying to find their way in this world. When you switch on on Fox and there's 7 channels of crazed multimillionaire televangelists sucking the life and money out of innocent people.
Yep.
And think, wow, I mean, could this be any more confusing? One thing I will say as we wrap up is that I right or wrong about religion, I believe the world would be a much better place if it suddenly didn't exist, simply because of the way people are treated and what they don't get out of life and how they're taken advantage of. The world is full of gullible people, and the world is full of horrible people who will abuse and use them to the nth degree with no care whatsoever for their existence. And as long as that is the way human beings are, this is the world we have to accept. God or no God, religion or no religion, This is our planet. This is our world. I can't see it changing. I feel so sorry for people who are suffering and dealt such a horrible hand in life. And I hope whatever it is, if you want to believe in God and that gets you through, who am I to say no? I don't personally believe that it's real. That doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that I don't believe it, and I'm open and willing to be changed. I have always said that right from the start. If there's something out there that's real, bring it on.
Well said.
Awesome. Well said.
Yeah. If you want any closing comments, Luke?
I think I've probably rabbited on too much tonight. So I'll and I don't think I could improve on anything that either of you have said. But I've enjoyed the chat.
Yeah, it's only three of us, so we tend to over talk a little bit without the other two guys. Hopefully they'll come back next week. If you're still tuned in, just a reminder that at the moment we don't have enough followers to be able to broadcast live on Facebook. This will be broadcast on Facebook. We've had a chance to download it. We're not allowed to do it live because Facebook have said you need 100 followers in order to qualify. So follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/ oh, we still got Making Invisible.
Yeah, I just noticed that.
Yeah.
Actually, we'll update that maybe.
There was something. Yeah, that may be it. That's what I probably saw, the Making Invisible visible. But yeah, please follow us or tell your friends. We need to get to 100, then we can go back to broadcasting live on Facebook. For now, it is just on YouTube. But thank you very much for keeping us company and being involved. Greg, Tamara, Fenton, as always, good to hear from you all. And we shall do it again next Wednesday, hopefully with a full team. We haven't had all of us together.
Yeah, as long as it's not the full Monty, we're okay. Full team, I can go for.
Yeah, no Monty. That's my dog's name. But
they'll definitely not let us stream live on Facebook if we go there.
No, we'll be dropping followers. Let me tell you.
Yes, well, that is true. That is true. All right, thanks again, Luke and Rich. An atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar, bringing it to you live from Perth. We'll do it again next Wednesday. I never checked the date. What is it? 19th. Next Wednesday, the 19th, sometime around 8 o'clock. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.